Sara Goodman Confino is the best-selling author of 5 novels. Don't Forget to Write, Behind Every Good Man, She's Up to No Good, For the Love of Friends, and Good Grief, which came out last week. Yep. And we have plenty of copies here if you don't already have one. After spending more years than she's willing to publicly admit teaching high school English and journalism, she's currently writing full-time and trying to make a living off the crazy stories in her head. She lives in Montgomery County, Maryland, with her husband, 2 sons, 2 miniature schnauzers, and a goldfish that seems to be vying for the world record of longest living fish.
3 years this month.
When she's not writing or frantically parenting, she can be found on the Peloton, at the beach, at a Bruce Springsteen concert, yay, and sometimes even dancing on stage. So, Sara, welcome.
Thank you. Actually, and Steve here can vouch for that dancing on stage. He was there that night.
I saw it.
That's awesome. What city was that in?
That was in
Charlottesville.
That was Charlottesville. I was not going to go to that show, and a friend offered me a ticket if I drove, and I was like, all right, I'll drive. We wound up getting into the lottery. We were the 9th through 13th people in, and I wound up on stage that night. It was crazy.
That's awesome. Did you like the Courtney Cox?
Oh yeah. And then I totally went into school the next day entirely to show my students the video that it had happened, because they didn't believe me that I was going to get on stage. And I literally went in, I had a sub and everything. I still went in, I put it up on the board, and they were like, what's wrong with you? Why are you here? It's awesome.
Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about Good Grief. If you haven't read Good Grief, it is a book about 2 women who are both grieving. A mother and a daughter-in-law. The daughter-in-law has lost her husband, the mother has lost her son and her husband. And it's about how these 2 women end up living in the same house for a while, and the interplay and relationship between the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law, and how they kind of grow to understand each other. So you have said that your books are based in stories that are uniquely yours. And as you said in your bio, this crazy stories in your head. Tell us about how you came up with the idea for Good Grief.
So Good Grief was actually born at a writer's conference, and what is her name? Julia Whelan, the audiobook narrator, was the keynote speaker, and she talked that day about telling a story that was uniquely yours. And I started thinking about what was my story right then, what was something that only I could tell. So my husband is still alive, although, day to day, that's questionable if we're going to let him keep doing that. But, he got a job with a band, and he was traveling a ton. And I was kind of single parenting while teaching and writing, and it felt pretty impossible. And that's with a support network. That's with my parents 1.5 miles away to help me. That's with my best friend on the street behind to help me. And it was still exhausting beyond belief. Now, my father's father died in 1960 when my dad was 9 years old, so I never met him. And my grandmother raised him on her own in an era where a woman couldn't get a credit card without a man signing off on it. And I remember thinking a lot about, how did she do this? Like, she didn't have nearly the same kind of support network. My aunt and uncle stepped in. My aunt is 14 years older than my dad. If I tell you exactly how old, she will find me and kill me. But she helped a lot, and my great aunt and uncle helped a lot as well. But I really was thinking about that as I was going through doing this myself. And the story kind of came out of that. I knew I wanted an older character as well as for the mother-in-law. And I didn't want it to be Barbara, the main character's mother. I wanted it to be a more contentious relationship. And I think anyone who's been married has had an in-law story where they were like, is this really happening right now? I have to put up with this. And as I like to explain it, it's not that in-laws do things wrong necessarily, it's that they do it differently in your space. And you kind of can't critique it or say, no, we don't do that this way here, because it's your mother-in-law and you still have to maintain that relationship. So I like the idea of playing with that. And the story kind of grew out of that idea. So while, again, I still have my husband and he's not on the road anymore, I'm not doing this by myself anymore, which is much, much easier having help. It was also about learning to ask for and accept help. I am really bad at that. I am the person who will run myself ragged before I admit that I could use help with anything. And the book is actually dedicated to my best friend, who would be here tonight, but she is a kindergarten teacher and it's the 2nd week of school and she is so exhausted. She's like ready to pass out, and I finally told her, please don't come. Stay home, rest, you need this. Honestly, I could not do this motherhood journey without her. And so that was part of the story, learning to really accept that help. There were times she would just come over and say, "You're taking a break." And, I'd be like, no, I'm fine. And she would look at me and be like, "Sarah, take the break." And it was a lesson I needed to learn as a mom. I don't need to do everything. We can't do everything ourselves. There was a great meme about how the 40-hour work week was designed with the idea that someone else was doing the cooking, cleaning, and childcare. And the reality is, when you're doing all of that yourself, and I was working 2 jobs, you're going to burn out and you need that help. So that's kind of where all of this came from. That was a really long-winded answer to that question. Sorry.
So this book deals with a lot of loss, and yet at the same time, it is a pretty lighthearted and funny book. How did you strike the right balance between the sadness that's just inherent in the story and then also keeping it upbeat?
So I sold the book before I wrote it, and then I sat down to write it and realized, oh no, this one's a lot harder than I thought it was going to be because of that exact issue. Now, I knew I was setting it 2 years after the loss of Harry, Barbara's husband, because I didn't want it to be a sad dealing with the actual being in the moment of grief story. That was too much. I didn't want that. And an author friend of mine interviewed me for something recently and asked me why I chose to write a story about grief. And I gave her some random answer that I came up with, and I was lying in bed that night trying to fall asleep, as one does, and going over everything wrong you did all day. And I realized I didn't write a book about grief. I wrote a book about healing from grief. And that's kind of the distinction. And I thought a lot about that terrible, terrible 90s movie, Bounce. Has anyone seen that? Don't go watch it if you didn't. It was terrible. It was really bad. It was Gwyneth Paltrow and Ben Affleck and their little, whatever they call them. They weren't Bennifer. What were they? Bennett? I don't know. Anyway. But Gwyneth Paltrow's character has a line about everyone says to bounce back from something, but when you bounce, you keep hitting the ground over and over again. And I thought about how when all of us, we get to a point where we think, okay, I've gotten through this, I can do this now. And then you hit the ground again. And you are going to keep having those moments where you think you're ready, and sometimes it takes another person to show you you're not quite there, you still have some more growing to do. So the story is about that healing process and about being able to move on and finding yourself again. And I was going through some of that with my husband being gone and us trying to figure out, were we going to make it with us not being in the same state a lot of the time? And it really was about that idea of finding a way to move forward more than the actual grief process. And I think that's how I was able to put that humor in it, because we need humor. Look at the world today. If you don't laugh, you're going to start screaming sometimes, and that laughter is important. So I like being able to put that in the books as well.
So I assume that part of the decision to set it in the 60s had to do with what you touched on in the beginning about that was a difficult time to be a single mother, or single, woman of any kind, of any, status. But talk a little bit about that setting of the 60s, and did that require a lot of research?
So my last few books have been set in the early 60s. Part of that was born on publication day for She's Up to No Good. I was at the beach and my editor emailed me and said, "What's next?" And she had just rejected my previous idea that I'd written 40,000 words of. I was not super happy. That's about 100 pages. And a bookstagrammer had actually called me the marvelous Mrs. Confino that day. And I was like, I love that. I'm putting that on my classroom door, which I did for 2 years until I left teaching. I wrecked my nails peeling that thing off my door. 0 students understood the reference, but the adults all laughed. It had a leopard print background, and then the marvelous Mrs. Confino. But I had that nasal vibe in my head. And what I was thinking about was how everything looked so bright and happy and colorful, but there was a lot going on under the surface that wasn't so great. And a lot of the issues that people were dealing with then are still issues today. And what I've had a lot of fun with in that era is you can talk about issues that are still very important today with women's rights and women's health issues and voting rights and workplace rights and all of these things. And it's not preachy or political because you're doing it in that older setting. Now, the joke answer for the 60s is that my favorite movie is Dirty Dancing, which it is. I watched that way too young. I did not get the abortion subtext plot in that at all. I watched that older. I was like, Mom, you let me watch that when I was 8? And she was like, you didn't get it. It was fine. But that was my mother in a nutshell. Don't tell me for saying that. Some people here know her. Anyway, I do still love that movie. I love all of the imagery. I've really had a lot of fun with that. And so these last few books, they're all a little bit intertwined with that. But I was able to tie in some real incidents as well. So if you've read the book, how many people have read it? I don't want to spoil anything. A couple of hands. Okay. When you get to Mrs. Klein at the hospital, this is a real story from my dad's mom. I can tell the story without ruining the book. My grandma Selma was a Romanian immigrant, and she was volunteering at a hospital. And she comes upon this horrible patient who is very racist, very anti-Semitic, and she's listing all the food choices that this woman can get. And she goes, okay, you can have a bagel. And she goes, I am not Jewish. I do not eat bagels. My grandma's like, okay. She goes, rye toast. She's like, I am not Jewish. I do not eat rye bread. And she looks at this woman and goes, lady, do I look Chinese to you? And the woman goes, no, of course not. And she's like, well, I still enjoy an egg roll and some good lo mein. So you know what? You can eat the bagel. And I was able to use that story to showcase some of the anti-Semitism of the era, which I did not anticipate would be as poignant as it is today when I was writing this. Same with Behind Every Good Man, the book before this. The incident at the country club with the anti-Semitism happened to my other grandmother. I won't name the club, but you have all driven past it if you were sitting in this room. At some point, I give it a lovely hand gesture when I drive past it because I know what they did to my grandma. But I like being able to bring some of that real life elements into the stories and have it really come to life. So getting back to the research question, actually, my aunt and uncle have been a lot of my primary research for the early 60s. When I started Don't Forget to Write, which was set in 1960, I was asking my dad a lot of questions, but he was 9. He didn't remember that much. And he finally said, call your Aunt Dolly and Uncle Marvin. My Uncle Marvin remembers literally everything. He is 95, I think. And literally, you can ask him the most random, tiny little detail, and he knows everything. For this book, I needed a furniture store. And I called him and I said, I need a furniture store in 1963 in the DC area. He goes, high end, medium end, or low end? I'm like, what? And he's telling me where it is and what you would get at each store, what the best things were. When I wrote Don't Forget to Write, I remember I texted him at 10 o'clock at night one night. This was 3 years ago. So the man's 92 and I'm sending him a text at 10 o'clock at night. And I think he'll call me in the morning. I asked him, how did you get from Philadelphia to like Atlantic City before they built the Atlantic City Expressway? This man screenshots Google Maps, traces out the entire Black Horse Pike, tells me how long it would take a normal person to drive it in 1960, or my father, who speeds. He knew everything. And my aunt knows all the girly stuff. I remember calling her one time and being like, all right, I know Gone with the Wind, I know corsets, walk me through a girdle. When did you wear it? When did you not wear it? Compare it to Spanx. How much did it set you in? Like, how uncomfortable was it? And she knew all of this. I asked her one time how you did your hair. Like, you know, okay, this takes work. My hair does not naturally look like this. I would be a frisball. And she explained setting your hair in rollers and going to sleep, and how the next day you would wet it a little bit, you would set it again, you'd go to sleep, and you would pray. And just all those little details. I remember asking her about makeup at one point, and she was listing all the cosmetics she would use. And it was really cool to be able to bring them into this, and they've had a lot of fun answering these questions and feeling useful for my writing, and I appreciate them so much for that.
I love that you use the word brassieres multiple times in the book. So most of the men in the book, with the exception of a couple of lecherous older guys, are pretty swoony. Was it fun creating Eddie and Joseph and Harry?
It was. You know, I remember the scene where Joseph is flirting with Ruth at one point, and he starts saying, you know, she calls him Joseph, and he goes, Joe. And she's like, okay, Joe. And he goes, Joey. And she's like, no, I can't do this. And she like runs away. And I remember coming up with that in bed in the middle of the night. And I started laughing. I woke up my husband, and I'm like putting it in my phone in my notes. Like, I got to use that. And I had a lot of fun with these characters and kind of making them be right for these women, but not too pushy with it, because they're not necessarily ready for this next relationship. They've kind of got to get there on their own. And I don't know, I had fun with that. I liked creating their backstories. I like really well-rounded characters. I took to heart that idea of every character is the star of their own story. And you know, sometimes you read something and you're like, wow, they just threw them in there to have some diversity, or they just threw them in there to, you know, move the plot along a little bit. And I don't want characters that do that. I want them to have their own lives. I want them to just kind of come into this story, but they are still fully formed. And I think that's really important with side characters. So, for example, Barbara's best friend, Janet, is going through it on her own. Janet has lost her mother. And while we know that from the beginning, we don't necessarily see how it's affecting Janet because Barbara's so in it by herself, dealing with the loss of her husband. And their eventual ability to come together with that is important because everybody makes it look easy on Instagram. Obviously, they didn't have Instagram back then, but think about social media. We're not looking at the full picture. We're looking at what people want us to see, and we all do that on some level otherwise. I mean, hi, I sent a picture of the dress that I was wearing to my two best friends and my mom tonight. Did I push the mess out of the way so they wouldn't see that I hadn't cleaned up behind like my whole vanity area? Yes, I did. Did I stand so I was blocking what my actual makeup area looked like? Yes, I did. No one needs to see that mess. And we all kind of do that. So I liked being able to peel back that curtain a little bit where we all make it look easy, but when you actually let somebody in, you can see that they're struggling. So Eddie, for example, who is Barbara's main love interest eventually in this story, he runs a grocery store. And okay, he runs a grocery store, but you find out that isn't what he wanted to do. He actually was a pilot in Korea and was injured and lost vision in one eye. He'd wanted to be a surgeon and couldn't after that. And was running the grocery store. He did it for his family, but that wasn't his dream or anything. And you kind of get a hint of who he really is through that. And I had a lot of fun crafting his backstory and his character and making him somebody that was worthy of the situation that he comes into.
So these characters, there's a lot of references to Judaism and holidays and Jewish food and Yiddishisms and stuff, but they're not really religious people. In fact, Barbara admits that after her husband died, 2 years have gone by since she's even thought about having a Seder. She's just not really focused on it. So I wanted to ask you what role Judaism plays in your life and how does that inform your writing?
So my mother has always said, I'm talking a lot about her considering she didn't come tonight. Normally if she's here, I'd be like mocking her and making, we play off each other well. My mother has always said, you've got to decide how crazy you're going to make yourself about religion. And that has been one of my favorite things to kind of come back to now that I'm raising my own kids. Because, for example, we kept kosher in my parents' house growing up. Loosely, if we want to take out, we ate it off paper plates. But I didn't have a real Oreo until I went to college because they were made with animal shortening. Like, we had Hydrox in the house. And we don't keep kosher in my house. I actually wanted to, and my husband didn't, and we eventually decided not to because my parents are so close. And the whole reason my parents did it was so we would know what it was. Their parents hadn't kept kosher, but they liked the idea of keeping that tradition alive. So because my kids spend a lot of time at my parents' house, they're experiencing it there, we figured that's good enough for right now. My mother doesn't know this part yet. We are not going back to synagogue yet this year for Rosh Hashanah. My kids, I've got 2 little boys, and they are not going to sit for that. Sarah back there knows them. This is not happening. My little one is quite the handful.
Your older one could maybe sit through a little bit of it.
If we bribed appropriately. Max, it's not going to end well for anyone. But we've come up with some of our own holiday traditions at this point. So, for example, I make challahs with them every year now. Like, we go through this. They love punching the dough. That's their favorite part. They love punching it. But we also then go and do, I always say it wrong, tashlich, where you throw your sins in the creek. And they love that. They always ask, like, they're asking all year, can we go throw our sins away yet? They don't really follow it because they'll be like, I'm not going to hit my brother anymore. And 3 minutes later, they're hitting each other because little boys are. I was not prepared for 2 boys. I'm just going to say that. But I like that we can kind of create our own traditions. And my favorite thing about Judaism really is that it doesn't matter how observant you are, we're all still Jewish. If you're going to synagogue on Rosh Hashanah, or if you're not, if you're observing at home, it's still, one isn't necessarily better than the other. One isn't, I really like that about the religion. With that said, with the representation in the books, I get asked a lot why I'm choosing to have this Jewish representation. And part of that answer is it wasn't there when I was younger. And what was there was really the pain and tragedy. So, when I was a kid, there were the All of a Kind family books, and I definitely confused a lot of those stories with my grandmother's stories growing up. I still sometimes question, wait, was that my grandma or was that book? I don't remember. And there were a lot of Holocaust stories. There were some immigrant stories, which were also pretty much trauma. There were some 70s immigrant stories that were much dirtier than my mother remembered when she gave me those books. I remember being like, Mom, do you remember this book? And she was like, oh yeah, it was such a beautiful love story. And I'm like, so you don't remember what actually happened in this, because I'm like 15 and okay. But there wasn't anything with a real happy ending. And I remember when I sat down to write what became my first published book, For the Love of Friends, I made my main character half Jewish because I didn't think anyone was going to read a story about a Jewish girl who wasn't just suffering. And when nobody said anything, I said, okay, I'm going in on this. Let's see what we can do. So I'm part of the Jewish Book Council, which is this great organization that hooks Jewish authors up with speaking engagements around the country. But you listen to a 3-hour session where everybody does a 2-minute pitch on their book. And my first year doing that, I was kind of horrified because probably 95% of those books were about the Holocaust. And I was like, hi, I write happy books. Am I allowed to be here? Please don't kick me out. And I was texting with another Jewish author who writes romances, Jean Meltzer. She's my author bestie and turns out to be my cousin by marriage because of course she is, Jewish geography. Our mothers sat together at an event and figured it out. And we were texting each other and we were like, we can't be the only ones who aren't writing trauma. And the trauma is important, don't get me wrong, but it's not our whole story. And so this idea of showing Jewish life, being normal people who just celebrate some different holidays and have some slightly different traditions, I think is really important, especially in today's world where everything is so fractured. One of my favorite reader emails I got was actually from a Muslim girl in London who thanked me for writing these books because it helped humanize everybody right now. And I was so touched that she took the time to reach out and say that to me. I get this email and she's wearing a hijab in her picture and I'm like, am I gonna be worried? Should I open this one or not? And it was the absolute sweetest reader email I've gotten. And that's it. We're all people. And I think that matters so much right now. So I'm gonna keep telling these Jewish stories and hope they keep landing and see what happens.
I'm going to put in a little plug for the All of a Kind family series.
They're
Best books
so good.
in the world. We have them all here. I have a little shelf talker on them and they're wonderful.
And they hold up too.
They do hold up. They're just that my kids love them. I loved them. My kids loved them. I can't say enough wonderful things about them. Okay, let's talk a little bit about writing and reading. Since not that many people have read the book, so I don't want to delve too much into the plot of the book. Tell us what you like to read.
So I read pretty much everything, and the hysterical part of me being sometimes called a romance author is that is the one genre that I tend to get the most annoyed by. There's nothing worse to me when a character does no work on herself but finds a man and suddenly all of her problems are solved, and I'm like, honey, you need therapy. This relationship is gonna end the same way that last one did because you didn't go to therapy. No. I'm actually a gigantic Stephen King fan. I've read everything he's written. Including his son's stuff. Joe Hill is fantastic. If you like horror, Joe Hill is the next voice in horror. He's fantastic. I love a lot of the classics. I'm a huge nerd for that stuff. I was an English major. I taught English. I'm a huge Gatsby nerd. I used to live across the street from the Fitzgerald's graves and go visit them because I'm creepy and weird like that. That was actually how I knew I was going to marry my husband. Our third date, we went to their graves at 3 a.m. with a lantern and my dog with us. Yeah. You could always tell when I visited because there'd be a stone on the grave. I'm the one Jewish girl coming and putting the stone on the grave. I have to list Jane Austen, but I prefer Sense and Sensibility over Pride and Prejudice. It's a little darker. It's a little meatier. I like that one better. And more recently, this is actually my least favorite part of being an author. I don't have time to read a lot of the stuff that's already out. I get asked to write blurbs for other authors' work before it's out, and that's taking up all of my time right now. While I'm reading some fantastic books, sometimes I want to read the new Taylor Jenkins Reid too, and I don't have time to right now. So Atmosphere is sitting there, haven't gotten to it yet. But I do read pretty much everything, and I like how I'm totally trashing romance, but my favorite book that I read recently is a romance. It's not out till, I think, May. It's called Soon by You. Dahlia Adler wrote it. I started reading this book. It's a modern Orthodox romance, and the main male character is Froome. He doesn't touch women, and I was complaining to my husband nonstop, don't make me read this book. I don't want to read this book. This book is gonna suck. Don't make me do this. And then I got like 4 chapters in and was so completely hooked. I'm like sitting there at the breakfast table, like with my kids reading this book. It was fantastic. Somehow it was super smutty too, with like, I don't know how that worked. It was wonderful. That one is totally worth it when it comes out. I'm trying to think what else I've read recently that was great. It's so hard when you're reading ARCs because they don't have like a cover yet and you're reading it digitally and you're like, you never remember the title at that point. That's like the hardest part with that. But yeah, I am a voracious reader, and my whole family is actually, half of our family group chat, my brother's out in California, is literally talking about books. So we all read the same stuff. It's great.
And when do you fit the writing in? You've got 2 young kids, busy life. So tell us about what part of your day is taken up with writing.
Whatever part they're not home for. It is, I've learned I cannot write if they are in the house. I have one ear listening for screams at all times. It doesn't matter that my husband's on duty. It doesn't matter that he's capable. If they're in the house, I'm listening for the screams. With that said, not teaching has made writing a much more pleasant experience because I wrote those first 3 books in the hour and a half after my kids went to bed at night. That was horrible. Do not recommend. But as Stephen King said in his book on writing, if you needed the money, like you've got to treat writing as a job. If you needed the money, you get a part-time job, and it wouldn't matter if you were tired or if you didn't feel like it, you'd go because you needed the money. And you have to treat writing the same way. So pre-kids, I wrote over the summer. That was part of why I went into teaching. I knew I wanted to write. That was the only job where you'd get 2 to 3 months of uninterrupted time to write a book. Once you have kids, that kind of goes out the window. So I really said to myself, if I want to make this work, I have to carve out that time. And that 7:30 or 8 o'clock to 9:30 window wasn't fun at all, but it was the only time I had. I know people who get up at like 4 or 5, but if I get up, the dogs get up, and then the kids get up, and then everything falls apart. So that's what I had to do. Now I drop them off at school. My mother jokes that I spend an hour sending her memes, which isn't completely true, but it's not completely not true either. And then I can sit down and actually get to work. So my sweet spot right now is probably about 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Then I hop on the Peloton before the kids get home and then be a mom for the rest of the day. But it's nice to not have to write like a vampire. I am enjoying that. And hopefully it's coming through in the books. And
All right, I'm going to turn to audience questions, but before I do, what are you working on now?
so the next book is done. I'm working on edits right now. It is called Off the Record. It is possibly my favorite thing I've written so far, and my mother, agent, and editor all agreed that it is possibly the best thing I've done so far. It is set in 1962. It is a recent graduate of the University of Maryland, Judy, who wants to be a reporter, and nobody will hire her because she's a woman. And she gets a job in a typing pool at a local newspaper in DC. And she winds up on an editor's desk. She answers a phone call after hours and gets what she thinks is a hot tip. The editor says drop it and demotes her back down to the typing pool. And with the help of a male reporter, she follows this and they uncover a Cuban spy plot. I told my editor, just put it in every category you can find because it's half Jewish rom-com, half 1960s Cold War spy thriller. It's got a little bit of everything. It's kind of crazy and it's so much fun. It's ridiculous. My editor, like, you get an editorial letter saying everything you need to fix. And most of my friends get pretty long edit letters. Like, I know a friend who got a 26-page single-spaced edit letter, which she was losing her mind at that point. This was 3 pages, and 1.5 pages of it was pretty much, oh my God, I love this book. This is insane. I love this character. This character is the best character I've ever seen. Stuff like that. Like, it was really, you know, I still had to take 3 days to lie on the floor and moan and be like, I can't change anything. It's perfect as it is. And then I get up and I get to work. But I love it. It's coming out in June, and I cannot wait on this one. So.
Great. Well, thank you, Sarah. Does anyone have any questions about the book, about writing, anything? Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad I landed on you because I'm going to read all your books. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your process. You were talking about how you really hone in on character and try to form, you know, I wonder what comes first and second and third, like the setting, you know, best friend, mother-in-law. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I tend to describe it, well, I always get a character first, and I tend to describe it like Athena and Zeus, where the character's in my head just pounding on it until she gets out of there. I don't usually know what her story is. I kind of just figure out a little bit about her, and she grows out of that. Once I have her, then I have to figure out what she's going to do, because I have no clue on that when I get started usually. So I remember with Behind Every Good Man, the one before this, I had this idea of a woman catching her husband cheating, and then she gets a job, but I didn't want it to be a job that was like what women would normally do in 1962. I didn't want her to be a teacher or a nurse. I wanted her to do something crazy and different. And I had no clue what that was going to be, and so I had to figure out a story for her. So basically, you know, my friends are very used to this. If they see me like walking down the street or in the car or something and I am full out talking to myself, they know I'm working. So my best friend makes a lot of fun of me for that, because she'll drive by me in the neighborhood when I'm out for a walk, and she's like, yeah, I would normally assume you're on the phone, but I know you're working right now. My next door neighbor does it too. It's pretty funny. She'll be like, yeah, I waved to you. You did not see me. You were in the 60s, weren't you? And I was like, people on the ICC trail by where I live totally know that that's my process too. So I will talk to myself. It's ridiculous. But I then have to do an outline. So once you're kind of a little bit more established with your publisher, you can sell on proposal. So you kind of come up with an idea and then you have to do an outline. I apparently don't outline like any other human on the planet. So my first outline that I had to turn in, I was an English teacher. So I did the Roman numerals and the letters and all the stuff like we teach teenagers to do. And my agent said, I don't know what this is. So I tried again, and I basically word vomited everything that I knew that was going to happen in the story. It was like 4 single-spaced pages. That's not how any other human does it, apparently, but it works for me. Every other author I know is organized and does it like chapter by chapter. My characters don't behave, is what I've learned. So I'll outline as much as I can, but while I'm actually writing, my characters are going to misbehave frequently, and usually that winds up being some of my favorite chapters in the books. So, gosh, what's a good example of that? There is a synagogue scene in Behind Every Good Man where the mother does something unexpected, and that was not in the outline. And I remember writing that and then posting on Facebook and saying, I am so sorry for this unhinged chapter that you were going to get in this next book, but it was a lot of fun. So I like to leave room, what I call the squishy middle, in my outlines, because my characters kind of find their voice on the page. And those long walks are really important to me, because that's where the characters come alive to me. That's where they talk to me, and I'm having conversations with them. And I really do sound insane, don't I? Okay. But hey, it's working, right? So again, my process probably doesn't look like anybody else's process for that, because I'm a giant weirdo. But if it's working, it's working.
That's great. Thank you.
Yes.
When you start a novel, do you have an idea of what the ending is going to be?
I have to know the ending or I can't write it. I don't always know all the middle. So that squishy middle, definitely, it's kind of like an accordion. It'll go in and out. I found if I can get to about 40,000 words, so that first 100 pages, it's gonna write itself. It's good. I'm good once I'm there. That first 20 to 40,000 words is where I tend to think, I can't do this. Oh God, I don't know how to write a novel. I'm a fraud. This is not gonna work. But I do have to have that ending at least generally in mind. So my debut novel was actually the 5th novel that I wrote. I wrote 4 before that didn't get picked up. And I would kind of write piecemeal. So I would write the beginning, I would write the end, and then I would cherry pick chapters. And that's actually why those novels didn't get picked up, because the scenes, to connect those scenes that I wanted to write, were absolutely death and dragged everything down. So I do have to write in order now, but I need to know that ending. What's fun about that is I'm really excited to write the ending by the time I get there, because I've been thinking about it for like months at this point. So I do like that part of the process.
How long does it take you to come up with the ending? Once you've kind of started, you got a character, you have a general idea, you know?
I don't think there's usually a set time on that. So like this book percolated a little bit longer than most of mine do. But part of that was the circumstances. I was full-time momming while my husband was traveling while teaching, and I was exhausted, and I think it took me a little bit longer because I was so burnt out. It was insane. For Off the Record, I came up with that idea pretty quickly and wrote that entire book in 37 days. I had a tight deadline. My mother has always said, if you give me a tight enough deadline and enough coffee, I could take over the world, and I think that's probably true. You know, it's funny. Good Grief was the first book I was late on. I had a new editor, and she was like, oh, take your time. Whenever you get it done is fine. And I was like, no, you can't tell me that. It'll never get, I was a month late on this thing because she told me that. So for Off the Record, I called her and I said, Nancy, listen, you got to give me a tight deadline and you got to be mean about it. And she was like, and she's my friend now. It's funny, her husband is best friends with my cousin's wife, so we were at the wedding together, like we're actually friends. I don't know any author who's friends with their editor like that. I have a text chain with my author and my editor, and all of my author friends are like, my editor doesn't reply for a month. And I'm like, oh, hey, let me text mine. Okay. But I was like, Nancy, you gotta be mean. And she was like, all right, it's due on July 21st. Is that okay? And I was like, take out the is that okay part. Tell me it's due before that. And she was like, all right, July 21st. And if it's not done then, it's not getting published. And I was like, that's what I need. Okay. And you know what? I had it done in June and I had time to edit it. Because if you give me a deadline like that, I will make it. If you say, whatever, I can't do it. Yes.
I was really intrigued by the relationship between the daughter and mother-in-law, and as I was reading it, I was like, no way, that mother-in-law has crossed boundaries that would, you know, and I'm older than you, and I wasn't, you know, I was born in the 60s, but I saw part of that, and I was like, no way. So it made me wonder, what drove that relationship? Was it the time frame, the 60s? Was it the Jewish culture? Or was it a device because you needed to create fiction? And so I was just very curious, because we are all aware of how to set boundaries. Whether or not we can do it is a different thing, but man, no way. Look, I'm having a strong reaction even now.
So part of it was the time period. If she kicks Ruth out, where does she go? There's a certain point in the book where you realize she doesn't have any place to go. And Barbara's not mean, is the point. It's also her children's grandmother, and she does respect that relationship to a degree for her children's sake. They like having her there. But also, she recognizes she lost a husband. Her mother-in-law not only lost a husband, she lost a son. And every time Ruth does something that is fairly triggering, and she does, she kind of has to take a step back and realize, you know, I can't throw this woman out. Like, she's been through so much, this really is. And part of it is the Jewish culture. There is a lot of respect for elders built into that. I had a lot of stories from my dad's mom. She wasn't a big storyteller. You'd ask her questions. My mom's mom, she'll tell the stories. But my dad's mom, you would ask her questions and she would go, why do you want to know about that? Like, that was terrible. We don't want to talk about that. And it was really hard to get stories out of her. But I remember her talking about when she was first married and lived with my grandfather's parents and how awful it was because she couldn't say anything. She couldn't, you know, she was in their house and there was no money. And that was part of where that did come from as well. But a lot of it really is that respect to her husband, even though he's not there anymore. How is she going to look herself in the mirror knowing that she threw his mother out when she had lost everything like that? And that's part of it. But it's also part of Barbara's not fully healed enough yet to really create those boundaries. And she thinks she is, but she's not. My mother-in-law stays fairly out of things. But my best friend's mother-in-law, for example, lives in Chicago and will come for a visit and announce that she's coming for a visit and not tell her how long she's coming for a visit for and not have a plane ticket back. And the last time she did that, she supposedly was going to leave after 3 weeks, but got a kidney infection that turned into sepsis and was sleeping on my best friend's couch for 3 months. And my best friend was losing her mind at that point. Yeah, it was rough. She would wake her up in the middle of the night and say she was hungry, you need to go make me food. And my best friend was like, are you kidding right now? Like, I have a job. Like, lady, I'm going back to sleep. And part of that was her husband is Filipino, and so her in-laws are Filipino. And culturally, her husband will not stand up to them and say they can't be there. They're actually divorced now, and they'll both come stay with her at the same time and not speak to each other. And it's like insanity beyond belief. Her father-in-law came in when she had her now 3-year-old with COVID, knew he had COVID, and still came to the house to see the baby, like stuff like that. So there definitely are situations, thankfully I am not in one of them, where in-laws really are that pushy and it is that hard to do that. In this case, it is more Barbara's going to have trouble looking herself in the eye if she threw out her dead husband's mother, who's still grieving all of these losses. So part of it plot device, part of it what I've seen happening with my best friend, who, it's rough when she comes to visit. And all of that kind of combined in the story. But I think that today it would work very differently. Today it'd be like, I'm getting you an apartment, you're going to go stay there, we're not doing this. like if my mother-in-law magically showed up at my door with 5 suitcases, no, we're not playing that game, thank you very much. So the time period does contribute there. Sorry, there was another hand.
Somebody else?
I think we maybe have time for one more. I know you had a question before.
So Barbara went to the University of Maryland, and you mentioned the University of Maryland tonight. Did you also go to the University of Maryland?
I did. In fact, my parents met there at a riot in '71 when they broke the windows of the book exchange, and my dad actually still works there. He started as a freshman in '69. He never left. Today was his, 56th first day of school at the University of Maryland. So, go Terps. Carolyn.
So I know you left teaching to write, and it was a trial, and I'm pretty sure the trial is over and the success. But you were an amazing mentor to your students, and I've seen things they have said about you. How much do you miss, not the teaching part, but that mentorship relationship, and have you found a way to replace that in the writing sphere?
So the teaching part, I don't miss it. I don't miss waking up and doing that at all. The kids, my students, I ran the newspaper for my entire 20 years of teaching, and that relationship is very different than the normal English teacher-student relationship. A lot of those kids I had for all 4 years. A lot of those kids I had for multiple periods a day, their junior and senior years. My high school journalism teacher, can you guys keep a secret? Off the record, is dedicated to him. He doesn't know it yet because it's a journalism themed one, and he is, Steve knows him. He is totally gonna cry when he opens that book. I'm trying to wait. I'm so bad at keeping secrets. I had lunch with him a month ago, and he's asking about the book, and I'm vibrating to not tell him. I want to have it in paper. I want to give him an arc and have him open it and see that. He's gonna cry. It's gonna be great. But those students that I taught in newspaper, I'm still very much in touch with. One of them is our babysitter, house sitter, dog sitter, everything sitter. We went to that wedding in Miami where I met my editor. She's the only person I would trust overnight with my kids other than my parents. And so those kids, that mentorship kind of doesn't end in a lot of ways. I mean, my high school journalism teacher, I was still calling him with journalism issues for the newspaper. They actually cut the newspaper that I started at Watkins Mill. It was my baby. I founded it. We were the first newspaper in the state that was publishing daily online, the first high school newspaper. We broke 2 national stories. That gutted me. And I called him and I cried to him on the phone, and he said, you know what? While it hurts, this is a testament to what you did, because they thought anyone could do that job, and they proved when it folded that they couldn't. And he made me feel better. This many years after leaving his class, he knew exactly what to say to me for that. So, it's not going to be the same kind of relationship in writing, but those kids, they're still my kids. When they found out the newspaper was getting cut, a bunch of those kids texted me. They're trying to work with the MoCo show to get an article about that, to try and get it reinstated. They had me get them in touch with former students who had been on the newspaper staff, and we all kind of worked together on that. So, no, I haven't replaced it, but those kids aren't going anywhere.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah, for answering all these questions. Sarah's going to be signing her book now, so if you would like, if you have a book, feel free to, we're going to put a table up here. You can come up and get in line. We have books up here if you'd like to buy one, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to you guys for